You send sensitive information online every day, right? But how can you be sure it stays private? Today, we're diving deep into PASETO, a technology that just might revolutionize digital security.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating development in the field, going way beyond traditional methods like, JWTs and addressing some of those inherent vulnerabilities.
Okay, so for our listener who might be hearing about PASETO for the very first time, let's break it down, like what it actually IS. The source we're using today calls it JWTs, the good parts. Can you unpack that for us a little?
Sure. Well, you can think of Paseto as a more streamlined and secure way to package and transmit data. It's really all about creating tamper-proof tokens, kind of like those digital envelopes we talked about before, but with much stronger safeguards in place.
So it's about keeping our data safe during those, digital handoffs. That's reassuring, especially with how much we share online every day.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Paseto achieves this without adding a whole lot of complexity. In fact, it's designed to be relatively straightforward to implement, which is great news for developers and ultimately for users.
That sounds really promising, but isn't like any form of digital communication inherently vulnerable? How does PASETO address that specifically?
That's a great question. And you're absolutely right. Nothing is totally foolproof, right? But Paseto incorporates some key design choices that make it significantly more robust than some of its predecessors. For example, it mitigates replay attacks, a common vulnerability with JWTs, by ensuring each token can only be used once.
Oh, so it's like a self-destructing message. Once it's delivered, it can't be used again, even if it, falls into the wrong hands.
Precisely. That's one of the ways Paseto makes it much harder for attackers to exploit stolen tokens. It also uses state-of-the-art cryptographic algorithms like Blake2B for hashing and XChat20 Poly 3305 for encryption.
Okay, now, trying to understand encryption algorithms can feel a little like deciphering ancient hieroglyphics. Can we break those down a bit further? What makes those specific algorithms stand out in the context of PASETO?
Well, with Blake2B, it's all about striking a balance between security and efficiency. It's incredibly fast, which is crucial for a smooth user experience, but it doesn't compromise on security. It's like having a security guard who can assess threats quickly without letting anything slip through the cracks.
So speed and vigilance, a winning combination in the digital world for sure. And what about that XCAT20 Poly 305? What does that bring to the table?
Think of it this way. You're sending a letter, but not just A and Y letter, one with a wax seal. XChat20 Poly 305 not only encrypts your data, the letter's contents, but also verifies that the sealer hasn't been broken. Authentication, ensuring the information hasn't been tampered with in transit.
Wow, that's a great analogy. So not only is the message itself protected, but there's also a built-in mechanism to detect any attempts at tampering.
Exactly. And that's just one example of how Paseto takes this multi-layered approach to security.
Now let's take a look at the structure of a PASETO token. The source we have provides an example, and it's quite a mouthful. Can you walk our listener through the different parts and what they represent?
Absolutely. So every Paseto token, regardless of its purpose, is comprised of four key parts: the version, purpose, payload, and an optional footer.
Okay, so let's start with version. What does that tell us?
The version, which is usually just a number like V2, indicates which iteration of the Paseto standard is being used. It helps ensure compatibility between different systems that might be creating or validating these tokens.
So it's like a language version, making sure everyone is speaking the same dialect.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Then you have the purpose, which is where things get a bit more interesting. This field, which might be local or public, determines the specific cryptographic techniques used to secure the token.
Hold on, I'm already intrigued. The source delves into this distinction between local and public purposes. What's the key difference there, and how does it affect how PASETO is used, like in practice?
It really all boils down to how the encryption keys are managed. With local Paseto, both the sender and the receiver, they share a secret key, like a password, which is used to both encrypt and decrypt the data.
So it's like having a shared key to a safe deposit box.
Yeah.
Both parties need that same key to access the contents.
Exactly. The source provides an example of a website and a download service using local Paseto to verify purchases and grant access to files. It's a streamlined approach when both sides can securely share that secret key.
That makes sense for situations where you have that, established trust and shared access. But what about those scenarios where sharing a key just isn't feasible or advisable? That's where public PASETO comes in, right?
You got it. Public PASETO utilizes asymmetric cryptography, which means there are two separate keys, a public key for encryption and a private key for decryption. The source highlights how this is often used in authentication systems like OpenID Connect, where a website needs to confirm a user's identity with an authorization server, but, without sharing a secret key beforehand.
That's like having a mailbox with two slots,
Okay.
one for sending messages in and another with a different key for retrieving them.
That's a great way to visualize it. And what's crucial here is that the public key can be, freely shared without compromising the security of the private key, which
Yeah.
is, of course, kept secret.
That's incredibly clever. It allows for secure communication even when there isn't that pre-existing relationship or shared key. Now, moving on to the payload, is that where the actual data we want to protect is stored?
You're absolutely right. The payload is the heart of the token. That's where the sensitive information is stored. In the case of local PASETO, the payload is encrypted using the shared secret key, but with public PASETO, it's signed with the private key, ensuring its authenticity and integrity.
Okay, so the payload is like the contents of our secure message, whether it's, encrypted or digitally signed. And lastly, what about the footer? Is that like a optional addendum?
Think of it as a place to include additional information that might be useful for managing the token, but isn't like part of the core data being protected. It might contain metadata related to, key rotation or other administrative details. Unlike the payload, the footer is not encrypted or signed.
So it's like adding a sticky note to the outside of our digital envelope with some extra instructions.
Huh?
Not essential for understanding the contents, but, helpful for management purposes.
Precisely. Now, within that payload, there's another important concept we need to unpack: claims.
The source mentioned claims as being crucial pieces of information embedded within the PASETO. What are these claims, and why are they so important for understanding, how PASETO works?
Claims are essentially pieces of information encoded within the PASETO, presented as JSON keys. Think of them as like attributes or statements about the subject of the token. They can be anything from basic details like eye color and height to more specific details like permissions or roles.
So little bits of data that give us context about the token and its intended use.
Exactly. And there's a specific subset of claims called reserved claims that have predefined meanings within the PASETO standard. These include things like is for the issuer, sub for the subject, odd for the audience, x for the expiration time, and so on.
Ah, so those reserved claims provide critical information for interpreting and validating the token. Like an expiration date tells us when the token is no longer valid, right?
That's right. The exp claim in particular is crucial from a security perspective. Setting appropriate expiration times is essential to minimize the risk of unauthorized access if a token is compromised.
That makes sense. The source emphasizes the importance of shorter expiration times and warns against the use of long-lived tokens, even with PASETO. Can you elaborate on why that is? What are the dangers there?
It all boils down to minimizing the window of opportunity for attackers. A long-lived token, even if it's, well protected, could potentially be exploited if it falls into the wrong hands. By keeping tokens short-lived, we significantly reduce the potential damage that could be caused if a token is compromised.
So it's like a proactive approach to security,
Yeah.
limiting the potential fallout, even in the event of a breach.
Exactly. And this is where PASETO's design philosophy really shines through. It's intentionally designed for single use to combat those replay attacks we talked about earlier. Unlike JWTs, which are often used as long-lived access tokens, PASETO takes a more ephemeral approach.
So using PASETO as a long-lived access token would be like leaving your front door unlocked, even if you have a top-of-the-line security system installed.
That's a great analogy. It defeats the purpose. The strength of PASETO lies in its ability to secure individual transactions or interactions, not to act as a permanent credential.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from the basic structure of a PASETO token to the nuances of local versus public purposes and the importance of those reserved claims. But I'm sure our listeners wondering, what does this all mean for me? Why should I care about this technology?
That's the key question, isn't it? What's fascinating here is that understanding PASETO, even at a high level, it empowers you to be a more informed digital citizen. You start to see the mechanics behind the secure services you use every day, and you can make more educated decisions about the platforms you trust with your data.
So knowledge is power when it comes to online security.
Absolutely. You can even start looking for services that explicitly mention using PASETO as a sign that they're taking security seriously. In a world where data is increasingly valuable and vulnerable, understanding secure methods like PASETO is no longer a niche concern. It's essential for everyone.
Excellent points. It sounds like PASETO has the potential to significantly enhance online security, but I'm also curious about its limitations. Are there any potential downsides or situations where other solutions might be more appropriate?
That's an important question. While PASETO does offer robust security, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Its strength lies in its single-use, short-lived nature. So if you need a token to grant long-term access or represent persistent permissions, PASETO might not be the ideal choice.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job. Just because PASETO is effective in certain scenarios doesn't mean it's the best option for every situation.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the nuances of different security technologies and their trade-offs.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this first segment of our deep dive, exploring the fundamentals of PASETO and its potential to reshape digital security. But there's much more to uncover. We'll be back after a short break to delve into some real-world examples and the broader implications of this fascinating technology. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of PASETO. I think we've laid some good groundwork, but now I want to explore how this technology plays out in real-world applications.
Yeah, that's a natural next step, I think. Understanding the theory is important, but seeing how it's applied makes it so much more tangible.
Exactly. And the source we're working with actually provides some great examples of PASETO in action, specifically using the PyPASETO library in Python.
Mhm.
It walks us through creating and validating tokens using both the local and public methods.
These examples are incredibly valuable for anyone who wants to kind of get hands-on with PASETO. They really demystify the process and show that it's not as intimidating as it might seem at first glance.
Yeah, I agree. But before our listener rushes off to start coding, I think it's important to take a step back and kind of consider the broader context here. We've talked about PASETO as a potential game changer in digital security, but are there any potential downsides? Are there any downsides?
That's a crucial point. Every technology has its limitations, right? And it's
Yeah.
essential to understand those before diving in head first.
So even with all its advantages, PASETO isn't like a silver bullet. Are there situations where it might not be the best fit?
Absolutely. One thing to consider is the fact that PASETO is designed for single use. While this enhances security in many scenarios, it can also create challenges in situations where you need a token to represent ongoing access or permissions.
So if I need a token to act as like a persistent credential, like a key to unlock a specific feature or service, over time, PASETO might not be the ideal choice.
That's right. In those cases, you might need to explore alternative solutions that are better suited for managing long-lived access.
I see. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job. Right. Speaking of tools, the source mentioned that PASETO libraries are available for, a variety of programming languages, not just Python.
That's right. The PASETO ecosystem is growing rapidly, with libraries popping up for languages like JavaScript, Go, Rust, PHP. This widespread adoption is a real testament to the growing recognition of PASETO's value.
So no matter what your coding language of choice is, there's likely a way to integrate PASETO into your projects.
That's the beauty of open standards like PASETO. They foster collaboration and innovation, making security more accessible to everyone.
And speaking of accessibility, the source emphasizes that one of the key goals of PASETO was to address some of the shortcomings and complexities of previous token systems, particularly JWTs. Was the intention to make secure tokens easier to use and less prone to developer error?
Yeah, that was definitely a driving force behind the development of PASETO. Too often security is seen as a burden or an afterthought. PASETO aims to change that by making security as streamlined and intuitive as possible.
So it's like building security into the very foundation of digital systems rather than trying to bolt it on later.
Exactly, and that's a crucial shift in mindset, I think. It's about prioritizing security from the outset, making it a core consideration in the design and development process.
Now, the source was quite critical of the misuse of JWTs, particularly their use as long-lived access tokens.
Hmm.
Can you unpack that a bit more? Why is that practice so concerning, even if you're using a technology like JWTs that's generally considered secure?
It all comes down to managing risk, I think. A long-lived token, regardless of the underlying technology, represents a potential point of vulnerability. If that token is compromised, it can provide an attacker with, prolonged access to sensitive data or functionality.
So it's like giving someone a key to your house that never expires. Even if you have a strong lock, that key could still be used against you if it falls into the wrong hands.
That's a perfect analogy. The longer a token is valid, the greater the potential risk if it's compromised. PASETO, with its emphasis on short-lived single-use tokens, mitigates that risk by, significantly reducing the window of opportunity for attackers.
It's like minimizing the blast radius.
Yeah.
Even if something goes wrong, the potential damage is limited.
Exactly. And that's a fundamental principle of good security practice, right? Minimizing the impact of potential breaches.
Now, you mentioned that Paseto isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Are there any other specific scenarios or use cases where it might not be the ideal choice?
One thing to consider is the sensitivity of the data being protected. While PASETO does offer strong encryption and authentication, the public method, it doesn't actually encrypt the payload itself.
So if I'm working with like extremely sensitive information that needs to be completely confidential even during transit, public Paseto might not be the best option.
That's right. In those cases, you might need to explore alternative encryption methods or use local PASETO, where the payload is encrypted using the shared secret key.
It's like choosing between sending a postcard or a sealed letter. You need to select the level of privacy that's appropriate for the content.
That's a great analogy. It highlights the importance of understanding the nuances of different security approaches and making informed decisions based on the specific needs of your application.
Now, as we've been discussing Paseto, it's become clear that it represents like a different approach to security. It's not just about adding layers of protection, but also about simplifying the process and making it more accessible.
Yeah, that's a key distinction, I think. PASETO is designed to be user-friendly, both for developers and for end users. It's about making security a seamless part of the digital experience rather than a cumbersome obstacle.
So it's about shifting the perception of security from being a reactive measure to a proactive principle baked into the very fabric of our digital interactions.
Exactly. And that's where I see the true potential of PASETO as a catalyst for a broader conversation about security and privacy in the digital age. It's about empowering individuals and organizations to take control of their data and make informed choices about how it's protected.
That's a powerful message. It's not just about building walls and fortresses, but about equipping people with the tools and the knowledge to navigate the digital landscape safely and confidently.
Precisely. And as we move forward, it's crucial that we prioritize security not just as a technical challenge, but as a societal imperative.
Well said. We've explored the practical applications of Paseto, delved into its strengths and limitations, and started to grapple with its broader implications. But there's one more dimension I want to touch on before we wrap up this deep dive, the philosophical underpinnings of this technology. We'll be back after a short break to explore that final layer. We're back for the final part of our Paseto deep dive. And, this is the last segment. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and talk about like the bigger picture. We've been really laser focused on the technical details, but I think it's really important to consider the philosophical underpinnings of a technology like this.
Yeah, I like where you're going with this. Technology is never created in a vacuum, right? It's always a reflection of the values and priorities of its creators.
Exactly. And in the case of Paseto, I see this clear emphasis on transparency, simplicity, and user empowerment. It's like it's a security solution that's designed to be accessible and understandable, not shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating here is that deliberate choice to prioritize those values. The creators of Paseto could have easily gone down that path of complexity and obscurity, which we see so often in the security world, but they made this conscious decision to make things as straightforward as possible, both for developers and for end users.
It seems like they were aiming for a sort of democratization of security, like making these powerful tools more widely available and easier to implement.
Precisely. And I think that speaks to a deeper understanding of the evolving threat landscape, you know. Security is no longer just the domain of specialists. It's something that everyone needs to be aware of and engaged in.
It's like we're all becoming stewards of our own digital security.
That's a great way to put it. We're all responsible for protecting our data and understanding the tools and techniques that can help us do that.
And Paseto, it seems to embody that philosophy by providing a secure yet approachable framework for managing sensitive information.
Yeah, it's a great example of how security can be both robust and user-friendly. It doesn't have to be a trade-off.
Now throughout this deep dive, we've touched on this idea that Paseto isn't just a technical solution, but a potential catalyst for a broader shift in how we approach security online.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It's about moving beyond that mindset of reactive security, patching vulnerabilities after they've been exploited, and embracing a more proactive approach, building security into the very DNA of our digital systems.
So it's about shifting from a defensive posture to a more offensive
Yeah.
strategy, anticipating threats and designing systems that are inherently resilient.
Precisely. And I think Paseto is a perfect example of that shift. It's not just about building stronger walls, it's about creating a more secure environment from the ground up.
And that requires a collective effort, right? It's not just about individual developers or security experts. It's about fostering a culture of security awareness across all levels of society.
Absolutely. It's about educating users, empowering them to make informed decisions and demanding better security practices from the companies and organizations they interact with.
It's like a collective awakening to the importance of digital security.
And I think technologies like Paseto are playing a crucial role in that awakening. They're making security more tangible, more accessible, and more relevant to everyday life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway you want to leave our listener with? What's the one thing they should remember about Paseto and its place in this broader landscape of digital security?
Hmm. I think the most important thing to remember is that Paseto is more than just a technical specification. It's a philosophy. You know, it's a commitment to building a more secure and trustworthy digital world, and that's something we can all get behind.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful exploration of Paseto. I feel like we've not only demystified the technology itself, but also grappled with its profound implications.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you. I always appreciate the opportunity to dive deep into these fascinating topics.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and empowered you to take a more active role in your own digital security. As we've seen, Paseto offers this powerful set of tools, but it's up to all of us to use them wisely and advocate for a more secure online experience. So go forth, explore, experiment, and let's build a digital world where security is not an afterthought, but a fundamental right.
Here, here.